Greetings from a cold and snowy United Kingdom. Happy New Year and a big thank you to everyone who's supported the channel over the last 12 months. 2025 was another big year in the world of wireless earbuds, and right at the tail end I relaunched my ReganCipher.com website. This not only gives you the ability to read text versions of all of my reviews, but the audio league table is in there too, so you can search by a specific audio characteristic or by a specific brand or model. All my frequency response measurements are in there too, so you've got the ability to compare different models and auto EQ from there. But even better is the ANC tool, which gives you the ability to visualize the effectiveness of active noise cancellation and transparency on a graph, and you can compare up to 4 different models with explanations of what each of the frequencies means in real terms. Unlike other reviewers, I don't put any of this behind a paywall. There's no Patreon or any subscription or anything like that. All of this is absolutely free. This is my first review of 2026. I'm going to be taking you through Geekfly's GF01. Now, you'll recall my last Geekfly review was the Vitas back in November last year, and I was a huge fan of this set, even going as far as to call it my wireless endgame, at least if audio is all you care about in a set of TWS. And that's an important distinction because neither the Vitas nor the GF01 are what I would call a versatile all-rounder, with no active noise cancellation, transparency, wear detection sensors, or really any of the features and functions that you come to expect when you're paying upwards of $300 for a set of TWS. The GF01's price tag is much lower, coming in at under $199, but the premise is still the same: to offer a convenient alternative to using wired IEMs without compromising on audio quality. They've included the same set of accessories, including the carry case and vast array of different ear tips. The charge case is still a bit of a beast, although this one is smaller and lighter, and on the face of it at least, the design of the buds hasn't changed too much, retaining that attractive faceplate but losing a little of the bulk. They've once again used their own built-in amplifier, and they've used the Qualcomm QCC 3091 chipset, so you're getting Snapdragon sound and that full aptX suite of codecs, including all the way up to aptX lossless. But as with any lower priced alternative, you're always going to lose something, and in the case of the GF01, it's in the driver arrangement. Whereas the Vitas used a 6 driver array with each of the drivers complementing the sound in its own way, on the GF01 they've reduced this to a single 11mm dynamic driver, and whilst the frequency response looks the same on the graph, the sound characteristics in real life are completely different, and for me they don't suit this driver configuration quite as well. I've stressed this in many reviews in the past, and I emphasised it in the review of the Vitas, but the number of drivers doesn't necessarily equate to better sound. In the Vitas' case though, it's what each of those drivers were doing, the capability of the drivers and how they all meshed together, that made the Vitas a special set. And without meaning to pick on this guy, it's one of the comments that I've seen quite a bit when it comes to the Vitas, where people have just looked at the frequency response, not having listened to them, and have expected them to sound a certain way. Now, ignoring the fact that the 8K peak is a resonance curve from the measuring equipment, the more valid observation here is that there's lots of fat in the bass, and for single driver and even dual driver arrangements, it's very difficult to move that air around quickly enough to give you a fast attack and decay. With the Vitas, the dynamic drive was just concentrated to those lower registers because the planars were handling the tonality and the bone conduction drivers the sizzle of the percussion, etc. It meant that despite a massive bass shelf, due to the timing and the coherency between each of the drivers, the bass still felt punchy and didn't feel bloated. We even saw objective evidence this was the case in the group delay and harmonic distortion metrics. The GF01 is using those same tuning principles as the Vitas, albeit even more V-shaped, but the bass, and especially in the mid bass, which is even reduced from the Vitas, sounds much more prominent, and it gives it a thicker note weight and much more depth and body. Often this gives tracks an earthy warmth and analog feel, with deeper male vocalists in particular. They come right from the chest, so if you like that style of music, then you'll probably appreciate the default tuning. When you go from the Vitas to the GF01, quickly though, and particularly with energetic genres, you can sense that that bass is definitely a little sloppier and bleeds into the mids a little more. As always, what we're hearing can be explained in the measurements and metrics. Here we've got the group delay and true harmonic distortion. In the group delay measurement, we see that the lows arrive a little bit later and hang on a little bit longer than the mids and highs. So each kick or bass note isn't a clean hit like it is on the Vitas, it's lagging into the next moment. On the distortion side, the second harmonic in the bass is elevated enough that you're not just adding a bit of euphonic warmth, you're effectively thickening and blurring the outline of each note. So when you put that together, the driver is both late and a little messy. In other words, the bass just feels a little bit disattached, because whilst it's got slam and body and depth, it doesn't have the punch that the Vitas was able to exhibit. Remedying this on the Geekfly app isn't really possible because it doesn't give you control of those lower frequencies below 120 Hz, and there still isn't a Geekfly app for iPhone. Thankfully you can with Wavelet though, and as you can see here with this, my own personal EQ, I've brought the sub bass and the mid bass down, enough to give vocals and instruments room to breathe whilst still retaining that thicker note weight. This opens the staging out, and whilst it doesn't have that holographic nature like the Vitas, it is still quite a spacious listen. The trebles are smooth but pretty detailed, and female vocals have just enough brilliance to be able to stand out without ever sounding sibilant. If you're new to the channel, this is the bit where you get to hear what the buds sound like for yourself, courtesy of a binaural recording. And it's going to alternate between the original and my EQ version, so you can judge whether it improves it or not. Despite my reservations over the suitability of the tuning, this is still a very capable set. There's some distortion right in the lowest frequencies, but otherwise it's kept very well under control throughout the frequency range. And whilst the sound, even with its out-of-the-box tuning, is a clear step up from the majority of the multi-purpose style buds that I typically review on this channel, it would be hard to argue its case against something like Soundpeat's H3, a product with a more diverse driver array, more features and active noise cancellation. At the same time, its battery life is half that of the GF01, its default tuning is even worse, and the dynamic driver just isn't as capable. Still, the GF01 does enter the top 5 of my audio league table, which, as I mentioned earlier, you can now find and search through on ReganCipher.com. Looking now at the fit, as I mentioned earlier, these are a little bit less bulky than the Vitas, but they're equally stunning and premium feeling, made from hypoallergenic resin and featuring another marble effect faceplate that is a thing of rare beauty. But they've changed shape too, with this kind of step up as you move away from the nozzle into the main body. For some users, that's probably going to improve isolation. For me though, it did quite the opposite, reducing isolation, and it always felt like these were going to fall out of my ears. As an earbud reviewer and enthusiast, as you would expect, I've got hundreds of different types of materials and sizes of ear tip, but no matter which one I tried, I couldn't really get a fit that I particularly liked. Fit is of course subjective and your mileage may vary, but this is another regression in my view from the Vitas. One thing that hasn't regressed is the mic. It's still completely unusable for calls, as you'll hear in the following sample, that is, if you can actually hear anything.
Geekfly GF01 performs on your calls. If it's anything like the Vitas, you're probably going to really struggle to hear them. It wasn't super speaking favourite this being special guest star in this review. But yeah, going back to the full performance, you can expect to perform in a busy indoor scene like this coffee shop.
Looking at some of the more practical aspects now, the latency on this model is around 275 milliseconds, so it's okay for watching videos, but definitely not suitable for gaming. The GF01 are extremely loud. I can listen to these on 50%, but anything above that and it starts to feel a bit uncomfortable. So I mean, that's a positive when it comes to battery life, because they're advertised 8 hours, they're actually pretty close to. I think I got around 7 hours 15 minutes on each of the attempts that I listened to, which is commendable for any set of TWS. The case also gives you an additional 2 full charge cycles. As I mentioned earlier, the GF01, like the Vitas, doesn't really have any features to talk of. As you've seen in the Vitas review, you do have the ability to customize some of the touch controls, but really that's all you've got in the app. You do have multi-point connectivity as well, but there's no wear detection sensors. The EQ is quite limited, as you saw. There's no active noise cancellation, so there's no worrying about customizing anything related to that. But to get away with that lack of versatility, you've got to really hit the heights when it comes to the sound, something that the GF01 for me doesn't quite do. Don't get me wrong, I like the GF01, but its biggest problem really is that it's not the Vitas. You know, had I not listened to the Vitas first, then I wouldn't be judging this as a trimmed down, scaled back, cheaper version, which unfortunately is exactly what I'm doing. The sound is great by TWS standards, it just isn't the amazing holographic presentation that the Vitas was, and I think it was unfair of me really to be expecting that, given how much Geekfly have scaled back when it comes to the driver arrangement. For me, the GF01's target audience, aside those who haven't heard the Vitas before and don't know what they're missing out on, probably IEM users who just want to get rid of the wires and don't want to compromise too much on sound. These are unquestionably a bass headset. They're for those who like plenty of slam in their lower frequencies with a smooth but detailed treble. If that sounds like you, and you're the kind of person who isn't bothered by features and functions, in fact you don't really even like them on your earbuds, then these might be the buds for you. Hopefully you found this useful, enjoyed it both, or neither. Please do give the video a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and leave your comments, your thoughts on the GF01 in the comments section below. I'll see you next time. It's ReganCipher signing off.